Innocent tyrants now fighting in vain.
Gospel Topics Essays. Joseph Smith's teachings about priesthood, temple, and women. In this series, I will thoroughly examine the Gospel Topics essays published on the official LDS Church website. Each essay will be addressed in the order presented by the Church, offering a critical and in-depth analysis of the topics they cover. Let's begin by examining how the LDS Church presents its perspective on this topic. Women and men enjoy many opportunities for service in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, both within local congregations and at the church-wide level. Among other things, Latter-day Saint women preach sermons in Sunday meetings and the Church's General Conference, serve full-time proselytizing missions, perform and officiate in holy rites in the Church's temples, and lead organizations that minister to families, other women, young women, and children. They participate in priesthood councils at the local and general levels. Professional women teach Latter-day Saint history and theology at church universities and in the Church's educational programs for youth. Because only men are ordained to priesthood office, however, questions have arisen about women's standing in the Church. This essay provides relevant historical context for these important questions and explains Joseph Smith's teachings about women and priesthood authority. Okay, let's start by breaking down many misconceptions in their statement. Women do not officiate in temple rites as they make it appear, despite how the Church tries to spin it. Yes, women perform certain rites like washing and anointing other women, but they do not officiate in the endowment ceremony. Their only role in that process is delivering the female name of the day, nothing more. Women are completely excluded from performing sealing ceremonies, a privilege reserved exclusively for male priesthood holders. While women can participate in baptisms for the dead and endowment ceremonies by proxy, let's be clear, they are never the ones performing the ordinances. That authority remains firmly in male hands. The Church may dress it up to look like women have a role in officiating, but the reality, they have zero authority in any capacity. Yes, young women in the LDS Church can serve missions, but let's not pretend they're encouraged to do so. In reality, they're pushed toward marriage instead, with constant pressure to find a returned missionary husband and start having children immediately. The message is crystal clear. A woman's highest calling isn't preaching the gospel. It's becoming a wife and mother as soon as possible. And let's not forget, the Church doesn't forbid women from serving, but that's only because they don't have to. The financial burden falls entirely on the missionaries themselves, including the women, so the Church loses nothing if a few choose to go. But make no mistake, female missionaries are an afterthought, not a priority. Another blatant misdirection from the Church is the claim that women give sermons in Sunday meetings and General Conference. Yes, women speak in sacrament meetings and even at General Conference. But let's be real, these are not sermons. Unlike traditional Christian churches, where clergy members preach sermons with spiritual authority, Mormon women do not hold any leadership power when they speak. The highest-ranking male priesthood holder always presides over sacrament meeting and General Conference, controlling the entire structure. And let's not forget, men, women, and even teens are assigned to give sacrament talks each Sunday. These aren't clergy-led sermons. They're brief, assigned speeches given by regular members of the congregation. So don't be fooled by the Church's clever wording. When they claim that women preach, they're twisting definitions. In Mormonism, preaching is just another carefully controlled script, not spiritual leadership. Another blatant deception is the claim that women in the Church lead their own organizations. Yes, the Relief Society, Young Women, and Primary have structured leadership roles, but let's not kid ourselves. These groups are not independent. At the local level, women's organizations are entirely under the authority of the bishop and stake presidency, all men. At the highest levels, they answer directly to the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, again all men. Women in the Church do not run their own organizations. They operate under male control at every step. The Church loves to parade women in so-called leadership roles, but the reality, they hold no real power. Every decision, every policy, every directive, all approved and overseen by men. While LDS women sit in the room for some priesthood councils, Their roles are limited to input, not leadership. Every council, whether at the ward, stake, or general level, remains under the absolute authority of male priesthood holders. Women's presence in these meetings is largely advisory. They can offer input, but they do not authorize or direct priesthood matters. The Church proceeds with the following. The restoration of priesthood authority through the prophet Joseph Smith is a fundamental doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Early in his ministry, Joseph Smith received priesthood authority from heavenly messengers. With that authority, he organized the Church, conferred priesthood upon other men, and ordained them to offices in the priesthood. By this same authority, Joseph Smith organized the Relief Society as part of the structure of the Church, which formally defined and authorized a major aspect of women's ministry. All this was done to prepare the saints to participate in the ordinances of the temple, which were introduced soon after the founding of the Relief Society. At the time of his death, the revelatory vision imparted to Joseph Smith was securely in place. Women and men could receive and administer sacred priesthood ordinances in holy temples, which would help prepare them to enter the presence of God one day. Let's be absolutely clear. The temple rites being referenced here were directly taken from the Freemasons within weeks of Joseph Smith being raised to the third degree of Freemasonry in 1842. That same year, Smith created the Relief Society, an organization that, at the time, had far more authority than the Church wants to admit today. What the LDS Church conveniently omits is that under Joseph Smith, women were encouraged to perform healings by faith. Women in the early Church acted under priesthood authority, and Smith himself described the Relief Society as part of the priesthood, though, of course, he made sure they weren't holders of it the same way as men. Don't take my word for it. Joseph Smith himself told the Nauvoo Relief Society there could be no evil in it if God gave his sanction by healing. If the sisters should have faith to heal the sick, let all hold their tongues. So what changed? Today, priesthood healings are strictly controlled. They are the exclusive right of male priesthood holders, starting at just 16 years old. Women, completely stripped of this power. What was once an accepted and encouraged practice among faithful Latter-day Saint women was officially shut down by 1946. Why? Why did the Church silence its women? What was so dangerous about allowing them to exercise faith in healing as Joseph Smith himself had endorsed? The answer is clear. The Church systematically erased any trace of women having real spiritual authority, tightening its grip on priesthood power and ensuring it remained exclusively male-controlled. Once again, women did officiate in the Nauvoo Temple, but just as today, their roles were never equal to those of men. Now that we've ripped apart the Church's opening 2 paragraphs, let's dive into the real substance, the meat and honey of this discussion. Part 1. Early Latter-day Saint understandings of priesthood. Let's tear into the Church's first set of claims. The restoration of priesthood authority came at a time of intense religious excitement in the United States. This excitement was driven in part by questions about divine authority, who had it, how it was obtained, and whether it was necessary. In the early 19th century, most Christians believed that the authority to act in God's name had remained on the earth since the time of Jesus' mortal ministry. Joseph Smith taught that Christ's priesthood was lost after the deaths of the ancient apostles and had been newly restored through angelic ministration. Even so, many Latter-day Saints initially understood the concept of priesthood largely in terms common for the day. In 1830s America, the word priesthood was defined as the office or character of a priest, and the order of men set apart for sacred offices, identifying priesthood with religious office and the men who held it. Early Latter-day Saints likewise thought of priesthood primarily in terms of ordination to ecclesiastical office and authority to preach and perform religious rites. As in most other Christian denominations during this era, Latter-day Saint men alone held priesthood offices, served formal proselytizing missions, and performed ordinances like baptism and blessing the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Now, let's break this down because there are several glaring issues that demand our attention. First off, let's shut this nonsense down right now. While there was plenty of religious excitement in the 19th century, The idea that most Christians believed authority had remained unbroken since Jesus' time is pure fiction. That's just another convenient LDS rewrite of history. The reality? Most Protestants, the overwhelming majority in early 19th century America, flat out rejected apostolic succession. They didn't buy into the Catholic or Orthodox claims that authority had been passed down through an unbroken priesthood. Instead, they believed the Bible alone was the ultimate source of authority, not some supposed divine priesthood lineage. In fact, they saw the Catholic and Orthodox churches as corrupt institutions, twisting Scripture to justify their power. Then there were groups like the Stone Campbell movement, Disciples of Christ, and early Methodists who believed Christianity had gone off the rails and needed a return to its original teachings. But even they never claimed authority had been completely wiped from the earth. They believed the Bible was more than enough to guide believers. And then along comes Joseph Smith, taking it to a whole new level, declaring that all authority had been lost and that it needed to be magically restored through angelic ordination. So let's be real. The LDS Church isn't just stretching the truth here. It's completely fabricating history. They weren't restoring some lost authority. They were inventing it from scratch. The Church continues with, unlike those in many other churches, Latter-day Saints extended priesthood ordination broadly to laymen, as directed by revelation. Over time, an extensive structure of priesthood offices and quorums was established. From the beginning, this structure was governed by revelation under the direction of priesthood leaders holding keys. The keys of the Melchizedek priesthood, given through divine messengers to Joseph Smith and later passed to others, bestowed the right of presidency, the right to administer in spiritual things, and the right to officiate in all the offices in the church. Let's not forget, Joseph Smith didn't discover the Aaronic priesthood in 1829 like the church claims. David and John Whitmer outright denied it ever happened. There's no contemporary evidence, no records, no discussions, nothing. The story conveniently appeared years later when Smith needed to solidify his authority. And the so-called higher priesthood? That was just as fraudulent. On June 3, 1831, Joseph and Sidney Rigdon were ordained to the high priesthood, later to be known as the Melchizedek priesthood. Though didn't Joseph receive this priesthood from Peter, James, and John, alongside Oliver Cowdery back in 1829? Ironically, Cowdery received this same priesthood not much later in 1831. How could Smith and Cowdery be ordained in 1831 when it supposedly happened in 1829? Because Smith and Cowdery lied, and the Whitmer brothers were being honest. The 1831 ordinations in Kirtland look nothing like what the LDS Church now calls the Melchizedek priesthood. In fact, it wasn't until after Smith became a Freemason in 1842 that the priesthood structure truly evolved. Suddenly, priesthood rituals, handshakes, and ordinances bore an uncanny resemblance to Masonic rites. So much for divine restoration. It was a manufactured hierarchy, cobbled together from convenient lies and borrowed traditions. The Church follows up with, in 1836, angelic messengers committed priesthood keys to Joseph Smith that would enable church members to receive temple ordinances. In an 1841 revelation, the Lord commanded the saints to build a temple in Nauvoo, Illinois, where he would reveal to his people all things pertaining to this house and the priesthood thereof. The culminating ordinances of the priesthood were to be found in the temple and would help prepare men and women to enter into God's presence. Let's get one thing straight. There were no baptisms for the dead, no endowments, and no sealing ordinances in 1836. The Kirtland Temple wasn't a temple in the modern sense. It was just a glorified meeting house used for blessings, washings, and anointings, nothing even close to today's temple work. Fast forward to 1840 in Nauvoo, and suddenly, Joseph Smith pulls baptisms for the dead out of nowhere during a funeral sermon for Seymour Brunson. With no temple font, members started dunking each other in the Mississippi River. Then in 1841, Smith conveniently receives a revelation, D&C 24, demanding the construction of the Nauvoo Temple, finally giving baptisms for the dead an official home. But it doesn't stop there. By 1842 to 1844, temple ordinances start piling up, including full endowments and sealings, rituals that just so happened to look a whole lot like the Masonic rites Smith had learned in 1842. Coincidence? Not a chance. Like everything else, Smith was making it up as he went, borrowing from whatever sources suited his agenda. The church states, Latter-day Saint women in the church's earliest years, like women elsewhere, participated actively in their new religious community. They ratified decisions by voting in conferences. They furnished the temple with their handiwork. They worshipped alongside men in meetings and choirs. They shared the gospel with relatives and neighbors. They hosted meetings in their homes, and they exercised spiritual gifts in private and in public. Early revelation authorized women to expound scriptures and to exhort the church. Even so, like most other Christians in their day, Latter-day Saints in the early years of the church reserved public preaching and leadership for men. In practice, common consent was limited. Only male priesthood holders had real decision-making power, while women and lower-ranking members were expected to sustain decisions made by leadership. Women did not hold the priesthood and had no formal voting power in key church governance decisions. Doctrine and Covenants 26:2:2, and all things shall be done by common consent in the church, by much prayer and faith, for all things you shall receive by faith. Amen. So while the verse in D&C might sound like it includes everyone, the historical reality is that women had no real say in the governance of the church. Part 2. Joseph Smith and the Nauvoo Relief Society. The church opens here with, the organization of the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo on March 17, 1842, marked a significant step in these developments. Wanting to provide charitable support to men working to build the temple, a group of Latter-day Saint women planned to form a benevolent society, mirroring a popular practice of the time. When they presented their plan to Joseph Smith, he felt inspired to move beyond such precedents. As Sarah Granger Kimball, a founding member of the Relief Society, later recalled, the prophet told them he had something better for them and said he would organize the women in the order of the priesthood after the pattern of the church. The formation of the Relief Society was not without controversy. In fact, it wasn't long before the society's actions, especially its involvement with the inner workings of the church, began to blur the lines between church authority and women's autonomy. The society would play a significant role in later years, especially under Brigham Young, as it evolved into a more structured organization that would become a major influence in the lives of Mormon women, though often serving to reinforce the patriarchal structure of the church, as we'll see next. The women named their new organization Relief Society. It was unlike other women's societies of the day because it was established by a prophet who acted with priesthood authority to give women authority, sacred responsibilities, and official positions within the structure of the church, not apart from it. The women were organized, as Apostle John Taylor remarked at the founding meeting, according to the law of heaven. As we just saw, women were not free to lead themselves. They were trapped under the yoke of male leaders. I am not spending too much time here, as most of the statements by the church literally have no bearing to the topic in this section 0. It appears the church is merely trying to distract the reader. Sorry to say. Part 3. Priesthood and the Temple. Once again, the church is just recycling the same old claims they've peddled at the start, and as I've already pointed out, they're flat out wrong. So let's cut through the nonsense and focus on a small portion of this topic in their essay that actually matters. The church states, the priesthood authority exercised by Latter-day Saint women in the temple and elsewhere remains largely unrecognized by people outside the church and is sometimes misunderstood or overlooked by those within. Latter-day Saints and others often mistakenly equate priesthood with religious office and the men who hold it, which obscures the broader Latter-day Saint concept of priesthood. Once again, the church is being completely dishonest with us. When the endowment was first introduced, men led the ceremony, guiding women through the various parts, including the initiatory and endowment rituals. Men also performed the sealing ordinances, which connected individuals for eternity, whether through marriage or other relationships. This practice reinforced the patriarchal framework within the LDS Church, where male leaders maintained control over temple rituals and spiritual authority. The Church continues on with, Since Joseph Smith's day, church prophets, exercising the keys of the priesthood, have adapted structures and programs in a world in which educational, political, and economic opportunities have expanded for many women. Today, Latter-day Saint women lead 3 organizations within the church: the Relief Society, the Young Women, and the Primary Foil. Here we have the church outright claiming that the priesthood, those male leaders, are the ones advancing progression for women, effectively stripping away any credit that should go to women themselves. Let's get real. Women's roles in the Relief Society, Young Women's, and Primary are nothing more than a training ground for them to become good housewives, obedient wives, and dutiful mothers who follow the rigid structure of the church. This isn't about empowerment. It's about reinforcing outdated gender roles and keeping women in their place, all while pretending that men are the ones doing them a favor. It's time to call out this condescending narrative for what it truly is: a systematic effort to diminish women's contributions and maintain a patriarchal hierarchy. The church closes out with, "Priesthood blesses the lives of God's children in innumerable ways. Priesthood defines, empowers, ennobles, and creates order. In ecclesiastical callings, temple ordinances, family relationships, and quiet individual ministry, Latter-day Saint women and men go forward with priesthood power and authority." This interdependence of men and women in accomplishing God's work through His power is central to the gospel of Jesus Christ restored through the prophet Joseph Smith. Let's not kid ourselves. This claim about the priesthood blessing the lives of God's children is nothing more than a glorified justification for a patriarchal system. Sure, they talk about empowerment and ennoblement, but let's examine what that really means. In reality, the priesthood concentrates power in the hands of men while relegating women to subordinate roles. The idea that women are empowered through the priesthood is a smokescreen. While they may be involved in some church activities, they still lack the authority and autonomy that men possess. This so-called interdependence is just another way to frame a hierarchical structure that prioritizes male leadership and reinforces traditional gender roles. Instead of genuine partnership, it creates an illusion of equality while systematically diminishing women's contributions and authority. The restoration of the gospel through Joseph Smith did not liberate women. It only entrenched them further in a system designed to keep them reliant on male leaders. This narrative doesn't reflect the reality for women in the church. It's time to acknowledge that this is not empowerment, it's control. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.